Let's transition to an AFC North battle. Joe Burrow versus Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. The Ravens are favored by 3 points in this game. It's an 8:20 kickoff on Sunday Night Football. The over-under for this game is 48. So I've been thinking about this matchup all week long. And I want to talk about the Bengals first because Bengal fans, they were upset with me because after they beat the Miami Dolphins last week, on Friday, in the immediate aftermath of that win, I made a post on Facebook, and I said that Bengal fans shouldn't be celebrating because if you consider the caliber of quarterbacks that they've played against so far this season, the Bengals honestly should be 4-0. Let me name the quarterbacks that the Bengals have went up against so far this season. Mitchell Trubisky, Cooper Rush, Joe Flacco, Tua Tagovailoa, and Teddy Bridgewater. Those are the quarterbacks that the Cincinnati Bengals have played against so far this season. So I'm hearing Bengal fans brag about the win over the Miami Dolphins. They beat the Jets in week 3. They beat the Dolphins in week 4. And I'm hearing Bengal fans talk about how elite their defense is. And I'm like, who in the hell have the Bengals went up against that's considered an elite quarterback? Lamar Jackson is going to be the first elite quarterback that the Bengals have played against so far this season. But forget about elite. He's the first good quarterback that they faced so far this season. Everybody else is mediocre. Tua Tagovailoa is a mediocre quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater is a backup. And even when he was a starter in the NFL, when he was starting, he was a backup. Mitchell Trubisky, he's awful. He's not even a starter no more in the NFL. Joe Flacco is past his prime. His best days are behind him. So this is going to be a true test for Lou Admiral, the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. This is going to be a true test as to whether or not this Bengals defense is elite. I love the personnel that the Bengals defense have. They got Logan Wilson, who I believe is one of the more underrated linebackers in the NFL. They got Trey Hendrickson up front as a nice pass rusher. They did lose DJ Reader on that defensive line, but they still got BJ Hill. They got Sam Hubbard as a nice pass rusher as well. And then, even besides Logan Wilson at linebacker, you got Jermaine Pratt. You got Clay Johnston as well as a backup linebacker. And I don't like their secondary. I always said that Eli Apple is suspect to me. But I do like Awazuki, the other cornerback, in their defensive backfield. And I love their safeties. I love Jesse Bates and Von Bell. And even their backup, Dax Hill. He's a nice free safety to have as a backup. We know the Bengals don't like to play. They don't like to pay players. So it's a great chance that Dax Hill is going to be the starter for the Bengals next season. They're not going to pay Jesse Bates. He can give it up now. They're not going to pay Jesse Bates. He's not going to get the money that he's going to demand. So they're going to have Dax Hill in their secondary, and I think he can do a great job. I really, really do. But again, this is the biggest test for the Bengals defense this year against Lamar Jackson and this elite Ravens offense. The Ravens have one of the best offenses in the NFL, and they lead in a lot of major statistical categories offensively overall. Obviously, they got Lamar Jackson. They got J.K. Dobbins as well as a receiver. So I like this Ravens offense, and I believe this Ravens offense can put up some points on that Bengals defense. They got a nice tight end in Andrews as well. Mark Andrews is a solid tight end in the NFL. He's not on the level like a George Kittle or a Darren Waller or Travis Kelce, but I believe Andrews can hold his own, and he's a reliable target for Lamar Jackson, especially in the red zone. Especially in the red zone. So that Ravens offense versus that Bengals defense, I'm going to give the slight edge to the Ravens offense. But when we switch gears and go to the Bengals offense versus that Ravens defense, I believe the Bengals have the advantage significantly because I'm looking at the Bengals receivers. They got Jamar Chase. They got T. Higgins. They got Tyler Boyd. And they're going to go up against Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark, Marcus Peters, and Marlon Humphrey. That's the Ravens secondary that's been one of the worst units in the NFL. They've been one of the worst units in the NFL. They gave up a 21-point lead to the Dolphins in week 2. They gave up a 17-point lead to the Bills in week 4. So this Ravens defense is one of the worst defenses we have in the NFL. And I think this is a bad matchup for the Ravens because the strength of the Bengals is their elite receiving core. And they have Joe Burrow throwing the football. And despite his early season struggles, Joe Burrow, over the last few weeks, has come along in week 4 against the Dolphins. Joe Burrow, he goes 20 of 31. He throws for 287 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. And then in week 3 against the Jets, Joe Burrow, he goes 23 of 36, 275 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. If my math is correctly, he's thrown for 560 passing yards and 5 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. So despite his early season struggles, Joe Burrow is starting to get into a rhythm. Now, the one thing for the Bengals, they have given up so far this season, they've given up over 15 sacks. And that was supposed to be the strength of their team this year. They brought in Ted Karras. They brought in Lyle Collins. They brought in Alex Kappa. And that was supposed to help their offensive line protect Joe Burrow because last year, Joe Burrow got sacked a league high 51 times last year. And so that was the weakness of the Bengals offense was their offensive line. So Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow, they expected Ford Burrow to be protected more this season. And it hasn't been the case so far this year. Now, they did do a great job against a pretty good, solid front 7 in the Miami Dolphins in their week 4 win. They only gave up 1 sack in that game. So the Bengals offense, slowly but surely, that offensive line is starting to do a better job as the season is going along. And if Joe Burrow can get any type of protection, these elite weapons that the Bengals have in Chase, in Higgins, in Boyd, the sky is the limit for this Bengals offense. The sky is the limit. The only issue for the Bengals this year has been their inability to run the football with Joe Mixon. Now, for the season, Joe Mixon, he has 82 carries, 224 rushing yards, only 1 touchdown. He's averaging 2.7 yards per carry. So Joe Mixon has been a non-factor in the early stages of the season for the Bengals. I expect Joe Mixon to have a better performance in this game against this Ravens defense. It hasn't happened so far this season, but I expect him to have a solid performance against this Ravens defense, and maybe this could get Joe Mixon into a rhythm, and the Bengals rushing attack can improve as we get towards the middle of the season. I think it's going to be key as we get towards the middle of the season and the climate changes, especially here in Cincinnati, and it gets more colder, and you can't throw the ball 40 times per game. I think it's going to be important for the Bengals offensive line to establish the rushing attack with Joe Mixon. I think Joe Mixon, at his best, is still an elite running back. I hear Bengal fans talking about that Joe Mixon is cooked and he's no longer the same player that he once was. I disagree wholeheartedly. I still think Joe Mixon is one of the premier backs that we have in the NFL, and I expect Joe Mixon to have his best game of the season in this matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. So I think this will be the game for Mixon to get back on the right track. And if the Bengals can run the football in this game, it's lights out for the Baltimore Ravens. They have no chance in hell at being able to beat the Cincinnati Bengals if they don't stop Joe Mixon. And, you know, that's going to be key. But for me, the key matchup is Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd versus Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphreys. And that's going to be the key for this game. That's going to be key to see who wins this matchup. Those Bengals receivers versus the Ravens secondary. And that is a strength for the Bengals and a weakness for the Baltimore Ravens. And that is why I'm going to roll with the Cincinnati Bengals to roll into Baltimore and beat Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. I'm rolling with the Bengals to beat the Ravens 24-17. So I got Burrow beating Lamar Jackson 24-17 in Baltimore, and the Bengals moving up in the AFC North standings and being the number one team in the AFC North at 3-2. So yes, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are going to lose their second consecutive game, and I think the Bengals are going to take care of business because the Bengals